My name is Diane, and I'm 56 years old. My sister laughed as I stood in the rain, drenched and shivering, begging her not to leave me there. She looked right at me and drove away, like I never mattered. That night, I didn't cry. I just walked home through the storm, wondering how love between sisters turns into cruelty. But a few days later, when she found the gift I left on her doorstep, she finally understood what real pain feels like. I never thought I'd live to see the day when the sister I once protected with my whole heart would humiliate me so deeply that I'd feel something inside me snap. But that's exactly what happened the night Clara left me standing in the pouring rain, laughing as she sped away. That evening had already been heavy with grief. We were gathered at the small church on Elm Street to honor our mother's memory, a woman who had spent her whole life keeping peace between us, never realizing that her daughters were locked in a quiet war that had only grown sharper with time. As I stood at the front, reading the last lines of a eulogy I'd written, I saw Clara sitting in the front row, her expression unreadable, arms crossed like she was waiting for the curtain to drop. Even then, I tried to see the little sister I used to know, the one who used to braid my hair and sneak out of bed to whisper secrets into the dark. When the service ended, the rain had already begun to fall. People murmured condolences, offered umbrellas, and hurried to their cars. Clara approached me with that familiar thin smile. "Come on," she said. "I'll give you a ride home." I hesitated for a moment. Her tone was unusually light, almost too casual, but I told myself not to overthink it. After all, we'd just buried our mother. Maybe she wanted to make peace. The first few minutes in her car were quiet, except for the hiss of the wipers and the patter of rain on the windshield. Then, as we pulled out of the church parking lot, she let out a small laugh. "I have to say, Diane," she said, glancing at me, "you really went all out with that outfit. Did you borrow it from a history museum?" Her words stung more than I expected. I looked down at my navy dress, simple, modest, one my mother had loved. "It's not a fashion show, Clara," I said softly. "Oh, I know," she replied, still smirking. "But honestly, sometimes I forget how old-fashioned you are." Her voice had that same lilting cruelty I remembered from our teenage years, the kind that sounded like a joke, but always drew blood. We drove a few miles in tense silence before she suddenly pulled over on the side of the road. "Could you grab the umbrella from the trunk?" she asked, already unlocking it. "I think I left something under it earlier." Without thinking, I stepped out, the rain instantly soaking through my hair and dress. I walked around to the back, lifted the trunk, and saw nothing inside except my small purse and a single wilted flower from the memorial. "Clara?" I called out. And then I heard it, the sharp roar of her engine, the splash of tires through puddles, and the unmistakable sound of her laughter fading into the distance. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. The rain poured down harder, blurring the road, the trees, even my thoughts. I was miles from home, no umbrella, no ride, just the dull ache of disbelief in my chest. My shoes sank into the mud, and my breath came in little gasps that felt too loud in the emptiness. I started walking. At first I told myself she'd come back, that maybe it was a sick joke gone too far. But the minutes stretched into hours, and no headlights appeared behind me. Each step squelched with cold water. My hair stuck to my face, my hands trembled, and I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for her cruelty. I'd told myself Clara was just impulsive, that she never really meant harm. But standing there in that storm, I finally saw her for who she was, someone who laughed at kindness and mistook gentleness for weakness. As I trudged along the empty road, memories started to rise like ghosts in the rain. I remembered how, as children, she'd always needed to be the center of attention. How she'd cry until she got the biggest slice of cake, or the prettiest dress, or our mother's comfort after one of our fights. And I remembered the first time I ever saw envy in her eyes, on my wedding day when Tom took my hand and called me beautiful. Tom. Even thinking of him now steadied me a little. He used to say, "Dignity isn't about how others treat you. It's about how you carry yourself afterward." I repeated those words under my breath like a prayer as I finally reached my street, soaked and shivering. When I stumbled into my front yard, my porch light flickered through the sheets of rain. I unlocked the door with trembling fingers, peeled off my drenched coat, and dropped my muddy shoes by the mat. The house was cold and quiet, except for the sound of the storm outside. I stared at my reflection in the hallway mirror, hair plastered to my face, eyes swollen with tears. And for the first time, I didn't feel pity for myself. I felt rage. Not the loud, fiery kind, but something slow and deliberate. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea with shaking hands, and sat by the window, watching the rain beat against the glass. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably warm and dry, laughing at what she'd done. But I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to be her joke. As the thunder rolled over the rooftops, I whispered to the empty room, "She'll never laugh at me again." People like to romanticize sisterhood. They talk about it as if it's some sacred bond. Pure, unbreakable, built on love and shared secrets. I used to believe that too. But when I think about Clara and me, I realize that love between sisters can sour slowly, almost invisibly, until what's left isn't love at all. It's rivalry wearing a smile. I was the older sister, the dependable one. I did what was expected. Good grades, early chores, quiet obedience. Clara, on the other hand, was a spark no one could ignore. She was born 3 years after me, smaller and prettier, with our father's dimpled smile and our mother's honey blonde hair. From the moment she could talk, she had a way of making people look at her, and she knew it. If I brought home a good report card, our parents would praise me. But then Clara would come running in, showing off a drawing or singing a tune, and all eyes shifted to her. I didn't resent her then. I told myself that's what being an older sister meant, letting her shine while I stood quietly behind her, making sure she didn't stumble. But over the years, her need for attention became a hunger that swallowed everything in its path. It wasn't enough to be noticed. She needed to be adored, and if someone admired me, she made sure to redirect that light toward herself. I remember my 16th birthday party. Tom was there, not my husband yet, just a friend from school, tall and soft-spoken, the kind of boy who listened more than he talked. I caught him smiling at me when we blew out the candles, and for a second it felt like I was finally being seen for who I was. But then Clara leaned over, smudged a bit of frosting on my cheek, and laughed in that lilting way she had. Suddenly, everyone was watching her again. Even Tom. Years later, when Tom and I were married, she confessed something that chilled me. "You know," she said one night after dinner, twirling a strand of her hair, "I used to flirt with Tom back when you two started dating, just to see if I could." She laughed like it was harmless mischief, but I remember the way Tom's jaw tightened, the color draining from his face. That was Clara, testing boundaries not because she wanted what was yours, but because she wanted to prove she could take it. Her affection always came wrapped in competition. She'd give me a compliment that felt like a subtle insult, offer help only to remind me later how generous she'd been. When she struggled financially years ago, I lent her money, helped her cover rent when her business failed. I told her it was no big deal, that sisters look out for each other. But a month later, at a family gathering, I overheard her telling our cousins, "Diane's been so kind, helping me out. I guess when you don't have much of a life, you have to spend your money somewhere." I smiled through it, of course. That was what I always did. I told myself I was being mature, gracious, the bigger person. But something inside me cracked a little that day, just like it had so many times before. The night of the memorial, her cruelty was no surprise. That mocking tone, the condescending smirk, it wasn't new. It was just the latest chapter in a lifelong pattern. Still, for some reason, that night hit differently. Maybe it was because our mother, the one person who had ever tried to keep us together, was gone. Maybe because Clara knew exactly how much I was hurting and chose that moment to twist the knife. When I told Julia, my daughter, what happened, how her aunt had left me standing in the rain, she was furious. "You've got to stop letting her walk all over you, Mom," she said. "She's been doing it your whole life." Julia's voice trembled with anger, and I could see the reflection of my younger self in her eyes. That same need to protect, to reason, to forgive. "She's your sister," I told her weakly, repeating the same excuse I'd used for decades. But even as I said it, the words tasted bitter. I thought about every time I'd turned the other cheek, every moment I'd swallowed my pride in the name of family. Forgiveness had become my armor, but maybe it had also been my cage. Maybe I hadn't been noble all these years. Maybe I'd just been afraid to admit that some people don't deserve forgiveness. That night, I sat in bed long after Julia went home, the rain still whispering against my window. My hands trembled as I replayed Clara's laughter in my head. I imagined her face when she saw me standing there, drenched and broken, and realized she had finally gone too far. For years, I'd been the sister who endured, the one who patched things up, who sent birthday cards and polite texts even when she got none in return. But something had shifted inside me that I couldn't undo. As I stared into the darkness of my bedroom, I felt a calm settle over me. Not peace, not exactly, but a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For once, I wasn't going to apologize for my anger. I wasn't going to excuse her cruelty or pretend that blood ties made betrayal any softer. For the first time in my life, I decided I was done being the forgiving sister. And as the rain tapped against the glass like faint applause, I whispered to myself, "This time, she won't get away with it." After the night Clara left me in the rain, something inside me wouldn't settle. I tried to sleep, tried to drown the memory under chores, television, even long walks by the river. But the humiliation lingered like the chill that had seeped into my bones that night. I kept seeing her face through the windshield, her laughter illuminated by the headlights, that carefree cruelty that had become second nature to her. For days, I told myself to let it go. Be the bigger person, I whispered the way I always had. But every time I repeated those words, they sounded weaker, emptier, like an excuse I no longer believed. It was one evening, about a week later, when I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out an old notebook. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and dust, a relic from my teaching days when I used to jot down lesson plans and notes for my students. I stared at the first blank page for a long time before writing the words, "Dear Clara." At first, I didn't know what I wanted to say. Part of me wanted to scream through ink, to pour every ounce of hurt onto those pages. But the longer I wrote, the more my tone changed. It wasn't rage that filled the paper, it was truth. Cold, clear, and merciless. I wrote about our childhood, the way she always needed to win, even when there was nothing to compete for. I wrote about how our mother's affection had become her trophy and how I'd spent my whole life trying not to resent her for it. I described the day she flirted with Tom, the way she'd mocked me at family gatherings, and finally, the night she left me stranded in the rain. But I didn't accuse her. I told it like a story of two sisters who started out hand in hand and ended up miles apart. I wrote about how envy corrodes love from the inside, how pride blinds us to kindness, and how sometimes the cruelest people are the ones most desperate to be adored. By the time I finished the first draft, my hand was cramped, but my heart felt strangely lighter. Yet beneath that relief was something else, something sharper. The letter didn't feel like closure. It felt like a weapon wrapped in silk. That night, I lit a single candle and began rewriting it neatly on cream stationery, each word carefully chosen, each sentence polished to perfection. The soft flame flickered, painting the walls with gold shadows. I didn't notice Ruth, my neighbor, until she knocked gently on my back door. "Diane?" she said, peeking in. "It's nearly midnight. You're still up?" I smiled faintly. "Just writing something that's long overdue." She stepped inside, her robe tied loosely, her gray hair braided down one shoulder. Her eyes scanned the letter on the table, then my face. "You've got that look," she murmured. "The one people get when they're pretending to forgive but are really planning something." I let out a small laugh, but it sounded brittle. "It's just a letter," I said, even though we both knew it wasn't just anything. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, honey. The kind of peace that comes from revenge doesn't last long." When she left, I sat staring at the half-finished letter, her words echoing in my head. But I couldn't stop. Something about writing it felt necessary, inevitable, like finishing a story that had been waiting to end for decades. I decided to include something else with the letter, something that would sting and soothe at the same time. I went to my bedroom and opened the small cedar box at the back of my dresser. Inside was my mother's pearl brooch, the one Clara had always coveted. When our mother passed, she left it to me, and Clara never forgave her for it. I turned the brooch over in my hand, the pearls catching the lamplight like tiny tears. It was beautiful, fragile, and full of meaning. It had belonged to the woman who spent her whole life trying to keep peace between us. Maybe, I thought, it should serve that purpose one last time. The next day, Julia stopped by. She noticed the sealed envelope on the table, the brooch resting beside it. "What's that?" she asked. "A gift," I replied. "For Aunt Clara?" Her eyebrows lifted. "After everything she did?" "Yes," I said softly. "For her." She frowned. "Are you sure it's forgiveness you're giving, Mom? Because it doesn't sound like it." I met her eyes. "Forgiveness looks different for everyone." She sighed, clearly unconvinced, but didn't press further. After she left, I placed the letter and brooch together in a small box lined with velvet. I sealed it with red wax, a color that felt symbolic, like a confession written in blood. The wax hardened under my thumb, smooth and final. As I held the box, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace exactly, more like quiet resolve. I knew I wasn't trying to hurt Clara the way she hurt me. I wanted her to see herself, to finally face the mirror she'd avoided her whole life. Outside, the sky darkened again. A soft drizzle began, tapping against the window pane, the rhythm steady and soothing. I traced my finger along the edge of the box, imagining her expression when she opened it, the mix of surprise, guilt, and maybe, just maybe, understanding. I blew out the candle, letting the smoke curl toward the ceiling like a whispered secret. In the dim silence, I whispered too, barely loud enough for even myself to hear. "She'll find it on her doorstep soon enough." It started raining again that Friday evening, the kind of steady, relentless rain that seeps into the cracks of your heart and refuses to leave. The sound filled my house like an old memory come to visit, a cruel, rhythmic reminder of the night Clara left me standing on the side of the road, drenched and humiliated. I stood by the window, watching the sky darken to a bruised gray. The streetlights flickered weakly, and the air smelled of wet asphalt and fallen leaves. I had spent the whole day trying to talk myself out of what I was about to do. I told myself it was silly, childish even, that I was too old for vengeance. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something she had stolen from me years ago. My dignity. I picked up the small velvet-lined box from the kitchen table. The red wax seal gleamed faintly under the light, smooth and perfect, unbroken. My hands didn't tremble as much as I thought they would. I slipped it into a paper bag, wrapped it in a clear layer of plastic to keep the rain out, and took a deep breath. When I opened the front door, the cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of earth and rain. I pulled on my coat, grabbed my car keys, and stepped out into the storm. The drive to Clara's house felt longer than it should have, even though I'd made the trip countless times over the years. The windshield wipers beat back the rain in steady rhythm, but every flash of lightning seemed to illuminate another memory. Clara's smirk at my expense, her condescending words, her laughter echoing over the sound of the rain. By the time I turned onto her street, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Her house stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, elegant and perfectly maintained, just like she wanted everyone to believe her life was. The porch light flickered, casting a weak yellow glow over the front steps. I parked across the street and turned off the engine. For a few seconds, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. My reflection stared back at me from the rearview mirror, wet hair clinging to my cheeks, eyes bright with something I didn't quite recognize. Was it anger? Triumph? Maybe both. Finally, I opened the car door and stepped into the rain. Each drop was cold against my skin, soaking through the thin fabric of my coat. I walked slowly across the street, the paper bag tucked under my arm like something fragile, sacred. When I reached her porch, I hesitated. The light above the door buzzed softly, casting halos around the raindrops. I could almost hear her voice in my head, sharp, mocking. "You always take everything so seriously, Diane." I placed the box gently on the welcome mat. The pearls inside clinked faintly against the wood as I set it down. My fingers lingered on the edge of the bag, unwilling to let go. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I wanted her to open it or regret it. Maybe both. Maybe I just wanted her to feel something, anything real, for once in her life. I stepped back, watching the little box sit there under the trembling light, its shadow stretching long across the porch. Then, without another thought, I turned and walked back through the rain. As I drove away, the thunder cracked overhead, echoing across the sky like a round of applause. My windshield blurred with water, but I didn't care. I knew exactly where I was going, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely in control. By the time I reached home, the rain had softened to a mist. The clock on the wall read a little past midnight. I hung up my coat, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the living room window. The rain traced delicate paths down the glass, merging and splitting, like tears finding their way down a cheek. I watched the streetlights shimmer through the mist, imagining Clara's face when she found the gift, the letter, the pearls, the truth dressed in gentleness. I pictured her confusion first, then the sting, then maybe, just maybe, realization. The thought made me smile faintly, though it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind you give when you finally understand something too late. My phone buzzed on the table, startling me. Julia's name appeared on the screen. "Mom?" she said when I answered, her voice soft but searching. "Are you okay? You sound different lately." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Just tired, that's all." "You sure?" she pressed. "You sound calm, almost too calm." I chuckled lightly. "Calm is good for me, isn't it?" She sighed, unconvinced, but didn't push further. After we hung up, I sat there in silence for a long time, staring into the rain. A strange mix of emotions churned in me: relief, sadness, power, loneliness. They blended together until I couldn't tell them apart. When I finally went to bed, the storm had quieted outside. The steady rhythm of rain against the roof lulled me toward sleep. For the first time in months, I felt light, unburdened. As my eyes drifted closed, I thought of the box sitting on Clara's porch, the pearls glistening like tiny tears, the words sealed tight inside. I smiled faintly, almost tenderly, and then, as the wind rattled the windows one last time, my phone lit up on the nightstand, Clara's name flashing across the screen. I didn't answer, but I could see the preview of her message before it faded. "How could you do this to me?" The phone rang early the next morning, jolting me awake. The sky outside was still gray, the rain having slowed to a delicate drizzle that clung to the windows like condensation on a secret. I reached for my phone, half expecting Julia, but the name on the screen made my stomach tighten. Clara. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but curiosity, that old, dangerous instinct, won out. I answered. Her voice came through sharp and trembling. "How could you do this to me?" she hissed. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. "Clara, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You think this is funny? After everything, after Mom?" I frowned, swinging my legs out of bed. "I don't know what you mean. Did you get my letter?" There was silence on the other end, heavy and uneven. I could hear her breathing, shaky and erratic. "Oh, I got it," she finally said, her voice quivering. "But I didn't deserve this, Diane. No one does." I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she kept talking, her words tumbling over each other in panic. "The pictures? The letter? What kind of person are you?" I froze. "Pictures?" "Don't," she warned, her voice cracking. "Don't pretend you don't know. You wanted to destroy me." My throat went dry. I had no idea what she was talking about. "Clara," I said carefully, "I left you a letter and Mom's brooch. That's it." A dry, hollow laugh spilled through the phone. "You're unbelievable," she muttered, then hung up. For several minutes I just sat there, staring at the phone, listening to the dial tone hum against my ear. The letter and the brooch. Those were the only things I had put in that box. No pictures, nothing else. A sharp unease twisted in my chest. Something wasn't right. I threw on my coat and drove to Clara's house, the tires hissing against the wet pavement. Her street looked different in daylight, less elegant, more brittle. Her white porch railing was chipped, and the flower pots by the steps had toppled over, spilling soil across the boards. When I reached her front door, I stopped cold. The box I'd left the night before was still there, but it was open, its contents scattered across the porch like debris after a storm. pages from my letter were torn and smeared with water, ink running down the paper like veins of regret. The pearl brooch lay beside them, snapped clean in half, one pearl missing entirely. My heart clenched. I crouched down, gently lifting one of the wet pages. The words blurred beyond recognition, but I could still make out the first line. Dear Clara. It looked almost pitiful now, like an apology drowned before it could be read. The door creaked open behind me. Clara stood in the doorway, barefoot, wrapped in a robe that hung off her shoulders. Her hair was tangled, eyes wide and bloodshot. What did you do? She whispered. I stood slowly, holding the torn page. Clara, I don't know what you're talking about. I left the letter, the brooch. Don't lie to me, she cut in, voice trembling. There were photos in that box, Diane. Photos of me, personal ones, from years ago. Someone put them there. I blinked in disbelief. Photos! I swear, I didn't... Don't, she snapped, her voice breaking halfway through. Don't insult me any more than you already have. She stepped closer, pointing toward the open box like it was a bomb that might go off again. They were in there with your letter. Who else could have done it? I tried to reason with her, to make her see sense, but she was spiraling, her fear feeding on itself. You hate me, she said, eyes wide and glassy. You've always hated me. You just hid it better than I did. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because there was some truth in them. I did hate her, or at least part of me did, the part that had bled quietly under her cruelty for years, but not like this, not enough to destroy her. Clara, I said softly, I didn't do this. Whatever you found, it wasn't from me. She laughed bitterly, stepping back. Of course not. You'd never get your hands dirty, would you? That's your trick. You always make me look like the crazy one. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I saw something shift in her eyes. Fear, guilt, maybe even realization. But it was gone as quickly as it came. She slammed the door in my face. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the chipped paint and the faint reflection of my own bewildered face in the window pane. The rain started again, soft but steady, soaking through my coat. I gathered the broken brooch and the scattered papers, but when I reached for the box, I saw it, something glinting faintly beneath the soaked velvet. I pulled it free. It was a photograph. Clara standing beside a man I didn't recognize, her arm looped around his waist. The picture was old, but the edges were burned slightly, as if someone had tried to destroy it. A shiver ran down my spine. I left the photo where I found it, backing away from the porch as the rain intensified. I didn't know what game had just begun, but I could feel it pulling me in whether I wanted it or not. By the time I got home, the sky had turned dark again, thunder growling low in the distance. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands trembling as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. That's when the knock came at the door, 3 firm, deliberate raps that sent my pulse racing. Through the window, I saw 2 silhouettes standing on my porch, one in uniform. I opened the door slowly. Mrs. Miller? A man's voice asked, calm but official. I'm Detective Harris. We need to ask you a few questions about your sister, Clara. The detective's voice was polite but firm, the kind of tone people use when they've already decided what they believe. Mrs. Miller, he said, flashing a badge as the rain dripped from his hat brim. I'm Detective Harris. We received a report from your sister, Clara Whitfield. She claims you sent her threatening materials through the mail. For a second, I couldn't even speak. My fingers tightened around the edge of the door, the wood damp against my palm. Threatening materials? I echoed. I sent her a letter, a personal letter, that's all. His gaze flicked briefly to the notebook on my table, to the half-burned candle from the night before. Would you mind if we came in? I stepped aside silently, my chest heavy. 2 officers entered, the second one taking quiet photographs of the table, my writing space, the remnants of sealing wax. Everything suddenly looked incriminating. Too deliberate, too precise. Your sister claims the package also contained a series of photographs, Detective Harris continued, flipping open a small notepad. Intimate ones. She said they appeared to be from years ago and had been burned around the edges. She took that as a threat. I felt my stomach twist. That's absurd. I didn't send any photographs. He looked at me steadily. You're saying she's lying? I'm saying she's mistaken, I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. He nodded once, jotting something down. Did anyone else have access to your home last night? No, I said. I live alone. He looked around the room again, then tucked his notebook away. We'll need to take a statement. You're not under arrest, but I suggest you get a lawyer before we proceed further. The words hung in the air like smoke. I watched them leave, their boots squeaking softly on the wet floor. When the door finally closed, the silence felt like a weight pressing against my chest. I sank into the nearest chair and pressed my palms over my face. My own sister, the same one I had defended my whole life, had turned me into a villain. An hour. Later, Julia burst into the house, her hair still damp from the rain, her expression fierce. Mom, what the hell is going on? Aunt Clara's been telling everyone online that you threatened her. What? My voice cracked. She posted on Facebook, Julia said, pulling out her phone. She said you sent her evidence of her sins, whatever that means, and that she's afraid for her safety. My blood ran cold. People are commenting, Julia continued. Cousin Annette said you've been unstable since Dad died. Unstable, Mom. That's what they're saying. I couldn't even find the words to respond. Julia's eyes softened when she saw the look on my face. We'll fight this, she said quietly. I know you didn't do anything wrong. Her faith in me was both comforting and heartbreaking. I smiled faintly, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Thank you, sweetheart. But we need proof, something that shows I only sent that letter. Later that evening, Ruth came by after hearing about the police visit. She stood in my doorway, clutching her cardigan closed against the chill. I told them the truth when they came by, she said. I told them I saw you writing that letter, and there wasn't a single photograph on that table. Just paper and a pen. Tears welled up in my eyes. Thank you, Ruth. You didn't have to get involved. Oh, I did, she said softly. You've spent your life keeping your head down, Diane. It's about time someone stood up for you. Despite her reassurance, the days that followed blurred into an exhausting fog. My phone buzzed constantly. Family members, old friends, even neighbors, everyone wanting to know what I'd done to Clara. My appetite disappeared. Sleep became impossible. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My blood pressure spiked. My doctor warned me to rest, but rest was impossible when half the town seemed to be whispering your name. In those moments, I thought of Tom. I could almost hear his calm voice from the years when life still made sense. The truth always finds daylight, Diane. You just have to survive the dark long enough for it to rise. Those words became my anchor. I repeated them every morning, every time my phone buzzed with another rumor or accusation. Then, one afternoon, as I was watering the plants by the window, I saw Clara across the street, talking animatedly to someone in a black car. Her gestures were frantic, her expression wild. When she noticed me watching, she froze, then turned away quickly. Later that night, Julia stopped by again. I think there's more to this than she's saying, she murmured. Do you know who that man was with her? I shook my head. No idea. Julia hesitated. He looked familiar. I think he's her new boyfriend, Eric something. She met him a few months ago at that investment seminar, remember? The name meant nothing to me at first, but something in Julia's tone, tight, cautious, made me look up. What about him? I asked. Julia bit her lip. I overheard her on the phone with him once. She said, if this goes wrong, we'll just make Diane take the fall. I thought she was joking. My blood went cold. I felt that quiet fury again, the same one that had carried me through the rain that night. Only this time, it wasn't sadness driving it. It was resolve. If Clara and this man thought they could ruin me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. As the clock struck midnight, I opened my notebook again. The truth had a way of finding daylight, Tom had said, and I was about to help it get there. The storm outside had finally quieted, but inside me, it still raged. Days had passed since the police visit, and the whispers around town hadn't faded. They'd grown sharper. Everywhere I went, I could feel the stares. Pitying, curious, judgmental. Julia tried to shield me from it, but even she couldn't stop the rumors. Clara had always been good at twisting the truth into something that fit her story, and now she'd painted herself as the victim. Poor, trembling Clara, tormented by her bitter older sister. But I knew better. I could feel it in my gut. Her fear wasn't of me. It was of something else, something she was hiding. I decided I wouldn't sit quietly anymore. One afternoon, I drove into town to the cafe where Clara's boyfriend, Eric, often met clients. I'd seen his face once before, in a photo Clara had posted online. A slick-looking man in his 40s with an expensive suit and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. When I spotted him sitting alone near the window, tapping on his phone, my pulse quickened. I took a deep breath and walked over. "Eric?" I said softly. He looked up, his smile fading. "Mrs. Miller, right? Clara's sister." "That's right." I sat down across from him before he could protest. "I think you and I need to talk." He leaned back, amused. "About what?" "About those photos," I said. "The ones that somehow ended up in my sister's mailbox with my letter." His expression didn't change, but his fingers froze around his coffee cup. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," I said, lowering my voice. "You're the one who sent them, aren't you?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "You really think I'd waste my time playing mailman for your little family drama?" But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the faint panic of someone who realizes they've been found out. "I know Clara didn't find those photos by accident," I continued. "She was scared when she called me, truly scared. But not of me. She was scared of what those pictures could expose, and if I'm right, they have nothing to do with me at all." Eric's smirk faded. He stared out the window for a moment, then sighed. "You really want to know the truth?" "Yes," I said. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Clara's been dipping into other people's money, her clients' investments mostly. She was supposed to transfer funds last month, but she didn't. I found out. Told her she owed me, or I'd go to the police. She begged me not to. Said she'd fix it." My stomach turned. "So those photos were proof," he said. "Screenshots of bank statements, documents she signed under other people's names. I sent them to her to scare her into paying up. She's the one who decided to drag you into it. Said if it all went south, she'd make it look like you were threatening her." For a moment, I just stared at him, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself breathe. "She told you to frame me?" He shrugged, smirking again. "Her idea, not mine. She said, and I quote, 'My sister's too soft to fight back. Everyone will believe me before they believe her.'" The words cut like glass. I kept my composure, though my hands trembled beneath the table. I reached into my purse and, as discreetly as I could, pressed record on my phone. His voice, slick and careless, kept spilling the truth like spilled wine, dark, staining, permanent. When he finally stood to leave, I said quietly, "You just saved me, Eric." He paused, confused. "What do you mean?" I gave him a tight smile. "You'll see." That evening, I drove straight to the police station. Detective Harris looked skeptical at first, but when I played him the recording, the change in his expression was instant. He replayed it twice, his pen frozen over his notepad. "So, she set you up," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. "And now you know why." He nodded slowly. "This clears you completely. I'll make sure your name is removed from the report." I thanked him and walked out into the sunlight, my legs weak with relief. The air felt different, cleaner, sharper. Over the next week, the truth spread like wildfire. Clara's lies began to crumble under their own weight. Her boyfriend disappeared, leaving her to deal with the fallout alone. Her firm discovered discrepancies in her accounts, and within days, she was suspended pending investigation. The same relatives who had whispered about my instability were suddenly calling to apologize, their voices dripping with guilt. Even our cousin Annette, who'd once mocked me online, posted a public apology. Sometimes the quiet ones are the strongest. I didn't respond to any of them. I didn't need to. But when I saw Clara's name trending in our local news feed, my heart ached. Not with pity, but with something sadder. She had built her life on lies and charm, and now both had deserted her. One evening, Julia came over with a bottle of wine. "You did it, Mom," she said, smiling softly. "You cleared your name." I nodded, staring at the window where the sunset bled into gold. "No," I said quietly. The truth did. Still, peace didn't come as easily as I thought it would, because 2 days later, as I was sorting through my mail, I found an envelope addressed to me in Clara's handwriting. No return address, no postmark, just my name in trembling ink. I held it for a long time before opening it. my heart caught somewhere between dread and curiosity. Inside was a single page. The first line read, "I never meant for it to go this far." The letter sat on my kitchen table for hours before I could bring myself to open it. The envelope was soft, the edges warped as though it had been carried in trembling hands, or maybe caught in the rain. My name was written in Clara's familiar looping script, but the ink had bled slightly, as if she'd cried while writing it. For a long time I just stared at it, tracing the letters of my name with my thumb. After everything she'd done, after the lies, the humiliation, the police, the public disgrace, what could she possibly have left to say? Finally, I broke the seal and unfolded the page. Her handwriting was uneven, shaky in places. The first words made my throat tighten. "Diane, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need to say this before I disappear from your life completely." She went on for pages, 3 to be exact, each line a confession, a plea, a half-formed truth. She wrote about how envy had shadowed her since childhood, how she could never stand the quiet confidence I carried, the way people trusted me. "You never needed attention the way I did," she wrote. "That's why people respected you. I spent my life trying to take what you had, not realizing it was something I couldn't steal." She admitted to everything, the lies, the manipulation, the setup with Eric. She confessed that the photos were part of her cover-up, that she'd panicked when her financial fraud started to unravel. "He threatened to expose me," she said. "I thought if I blamed you, maybe I'd buy myself time. But I was wrong. I've been wrong about everything." Tears blurred my vision. I could almost hear her voice in those words, no longer sharp and mocking, but small and frightened. Then I reached the line that stopped me cold. "You never needed to hurt me back. You already won." I set the paper down and exhaled shakily. Those words, simple as they were, pierced deeper than any accusation she'd ever thrown at me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It never had been. Julia came by that evening. When she saw the letter on the table, she picked it up gently and began to read aloud. Her voice wavered as she went, breaking at certain sentences. When she finished, she looked at me with wide, searching eyes. "She finally told the truth," Julia whispered. "She did," I said quietly, "but only after everything fell apart." Julia sat beside me, her hand resting over mine. "Maybe that's what justice looks like sometimes. Not punishment, just truth coming to the surface when it's too late to fix." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I agreed. Justice felt like too heavy a word for what this was. It was more like balance, the scales finally tipping after years of being uneven. Later that night, I walked next door to see Ruth. She was sitting by her fireplace, knitting as usual, the soft glow of the flames flickering against her lined face. When I told her everything, about Eric, the confession, the letter, she didn't look surprised. "I knew she'd come apart eventually," Ruth said gently. "People like that always do. They spend their lives running from the mirror, but the truth catches up in the end." She reached out, resting her hand on mine. "Sometimes the best revenge is just letting them see themselves." Her words settled deep in my heart. There was no satisfaction in Clara's downfall, only a weary peace. I didn't hate her anymore, not the way I used to. I pitied her. And that, I realized, was its own kind of release. The next morning I drove to the cemetery. The air was cool, damp with the promise of another rain. The grass glistened under a pale sun, and the wind carried that soft scent of pine and earth. I stood by Tom's grave for a long time, letting the silence stretch. "Tom," I whispered, "it's over." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the broken pearl brooch, the one I'd retrieved from Clara's porch weeks ago. The clasp was bent, the pearls dull from exposure, but it still shimmered faintly in the light. "It's time to let go," I said softly. I placed the brooch at the base of his headstone and traced his name with my fingertips. My heart felt heavy, but not in the same way it once had. The burden was different now, lighter, somehow honest. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but something about the ringtone, sharp, urgent, made me pause. "Hello?" I answered, my voice calm. "Mrs. Miller?" The voice on the other end was male, official, but not one I immediately recognized. "This is Officer Daniels from the City Police Department. We're contacting you because your sister, Clara Whitfield, is missing." The world seemed to tilt. Missing? I repeated. Yes, ma'am. Her neighbor reported her car still in the driveway. Doors unlocked. No sign of her since last night. We thought you might have heard from her. My hand tightened around the phone, my throat suddenly dry. No, I whispered. I haven't. There was a pause on the other end. If you do, please let us know immediately. Given recent events, we thought you should be informed first. When the line went dead, I stood frozen beside Tom's grave, the wind picking up just enough to scatter a few dead leaves at my feet. The peace I'd felt only moments earlier dissolved into something colder, more uncertain. For all the things Clara had ever taken from me, trust, pride, love, I never wanted her life to be one of them. I looked down at the broken brooch, the last piece of her envy now resting in the dirt. And for the first time in weeks, the sky began to darken again. Clara was missing for nearly a week before the police found her. When Officer Daniels called to tell me, his voice was calm, but there was a heaviness behind it that lingered long after the call ended. They found her in a small rental cabin 3 towns over. She'd been living alone, surviving off instant soup and canned fruit. No signs of foul play, no injuries, just a woman who had finally run out of places to hide, from others and from herself. She's not well, the officer said. Physically fine, but emotionally, she's not herself. I thanked him for letting me know, then sat in silence for a long time. I should have felt relief, maybe even vindication, but what I felt was something quieter, an ache that wasn't quite sorrow, but not joy either. It was like standing at the edge of an old wound and realizing it had finally stopped bleeding. Over the next few days, I heard bits and pieces about her through mutual acquaintances. Her company had terminated her. Her friends had vanished. Her reputation, the thing she'd valued more than love itself, was gone. She'd become a ghost in her own life. Julia came over often during that time, checking on me as though she expected the news to reopen every scar. But instead, I found myself strange. You're calm, she said one evening, studying my face. I am. For the first time in years. What will you do now? I looked out the window at the soft drizzle beginning to fall. The rain had become a kind of companion lately. Something cleansing, familiar, almost comforting. I think I'll send her some. Julia's brow furrowed. After everything she's done. Yes, I said simply. Not for her. For me. The next morning, I went through an old box of family photographs. Most were faded and curled at the edges, little echoes of a life before bitterness took. I found one that stopped me cold. A picture of Clara and me when we were children. She was about 7, I was 10. We were sitting in the yard, both laughing, faces smudged with dirt from the garden. Our mother had written the year in blue ink on the back, 1960. For a long time, I just stared at it. We'd been happy once, before the comparisons, before envy replaced love. I slipped the photo into an envelope and added a small note. Just 4 words, written neatly in the center of the page. I forgive you. No return address, no signature, no explanation. It wasn't about absolving her of what she'd done. It was about freeing myself from the weight of it. I had carried her cruelty on my back for decades, but I realized I didn't have to anymore. A week later, I mailed the envelope to the police filing her case, asking them to deliver it to her new address. I never expected a response, and none came. But the act itself was enough. That night, Julia came over again. She found me in the kitchen, humming softly while making tea. You seem different, she said, smiling. Lighter. I poured her a cup and smiled back. Maybe I finally am. She tilted her head. Do you regret anything? I thought about that for a long time before answering. I regret wasting so many years trying to win her love, but not this, not the truth, not the peace that came after. Julia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Dad would be proud of you. Her words warmed something deep in me that had been cold for too long. Later that evening, after Julia left, I stepped outside. The rain had returned, gentle this time, like a whisper. The pavement glistened under the streetlights, and the world smelled fresh, like something new had just begun. I walked barefoot across the porch, letting the cool drops soak through my hair and clothes. It wasn't the punishing storm that had once left me broken on the side of the road. It was soft, cleansing, merciful. I closed my eyes, letting the rain run down my face, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small or forgotten. I felt alive. The memories came back, the laughter, the pain, the endless nights replaying every hurt, but they didn't sting anymore. They were just part of the story, part of the woman I'd become because of them. Pain, I realized, doesn't just destroy, it purifies. It burns away the illusions until all that's left is truth. And my truth was simple. I had survived her cruelty without becoming cruel myself. I looked toward the dark sky, where thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, and whispered, "Sometimes, walking home in the rain is how you wash the past away." The wind carried the words softly into the night, and for once, I didn't feel the need to hold on to them. I turned toward the house, feeling the warmth of light spilling from my windows, and smiled to myself. The doorstep was empty, but my heart, finally, was full. And that's the gift she'll never forget. In the end, I realized revenge was never about hurting her. It was about freeing myself. All those years I spent trying to make her love me. I should have been learning to love myself instead. The rain that once humiliated me now feels like a blessing. It washed away everything fake between us. I didn't win or lose, I just finally let go. And sometimes that's the only victory that matters. If my story made you feel something tonight, maybe it's because you've known that kind of betrayal too. Sometimes letting go isn't weakness. It's how we take our power back. If you believe forgiveness can hurt more than revenge, tell me this. Would you have forgiven her?